Happy December, everyone! In this video I want to do something special and contribute something back that I've been working on called Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1. It's inspired by Phil's computer lab with his MS-DOS starter pack, which is a floppy that allows you to install essential drivers on top of your MS-DOS system. He also made something called MS-DOS Super Easy, which is something that allows you to do this with Windows 98 based systems. This floppy is a single floppy, the one that I've made, the Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1, that can do both. And it won't install just the drivers, but also all the tools that you will probably need for your retro gaming system, such as slowdown utilities and other handy tools that you would want to use in your daily MS-DOS activities. So without further ado, let's show you how to install a computer using Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1. I've just inserted the floppy, and the first thing that you'll be presented with is this boot manager. This boot manager allows you to start Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1. It's also going to allow you to boot to the hard drive, so you can leave the floppy drive in the computer between reboots. And for systems that don't support CD-ROM booting, you can CD-ROM boot with this, which is especially useful in DOSBox, but also on other motherboards that don't support CD-ROM booting yet. This will only work with IDE CD-ROM DIMEs though. This will not work with a SCSI-based CD-ROM system. The last option allows you to install this boot manager to a different floppy in case you want to copy it for your own floppy. You will also need to copy some manual files from the boot folder. We're going to choose Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 to start into this version of MS-DOS. Now, this doesn't have to be installed. It can also run entirely from the floppy itself. So the first thing we are greeted with is a choice for the memory manager that we wish to use. These are more memory managers than you typically need for a DOS system, because some more modern systems have problems with high mem. So for completeness, I've also bundled the ones from FreeDOS like JMMX, HiMemX, and of course the combination of EMM386 with HiMX, to allow this floppy to work on systems that may not natively support DOS very well, such as my ThinkPad laptop. Now, in general, it's recommended to pick the top option, and when you run into problems with your software, for example a game that's not starting correctly, just reboot and try the next available option until you find one that works. You don't have to understand too much of MS-DOS in order to pick the right option, as long as you just go down the list. In general, you'll be using the EMM386 option or the HiMem option, depending on which drivers you need and which game you want to play. In this case, we're going to go for the EMM option. It's now going to automatically limit the memory to something that maximizes your compatibility with DOS games. We'll touch more on this later. And now it's asking us if we want drive caching. This isn't Smart Drive, this is a different one that I find it to be better. You can enable it, it will use more memory, you can disable it, and then your system will be a little bit slower. We're going to enable it. The next question is if we want USB support. If you choose to do USB support, this is only for the systems that don't handle USB automatically with the BIOS. So most of you will be picking no because either your BIOS already handles it or because you don't have USB on your system. Some systems, such as VirtualBox, they need this driver for the USB to function. So if that's something you want, you can pick yes here. The next thing is if you want CD-ROM support and SCSI support. If you want this, then you choose the ViteCDD driver if you wish to use a very tried and tested driver that works on most games, and it's the one that you'll find in older computers and also in MS-DOS starter pack from Phil. If you want a bit more modern driver that also supports SATA drives very well and can integrate with the caching that we enabled earlier, you can pick the XDVD2. This is going to give you faster copy speeds, it's going to give you more modern CD-ROM drive support, but it might not be as compatible with the game that you're wanting to play. By default, we use ViteCDD. The next option you get is if you wish to run the SHSU CDX driver from FreeDOS. It's more RAM efficient, and it can also support ISO mounting with a different tool that's included in this DOS floppy. Or we can choose the one from Microsoft for maximum compatibility. In most use cases, the first option will be the best option for you. Up next, it's asking if we want mouse support. If you select yes, it will install the Qt Mouse driver for mouse support in pretty much all the applications. Now it's asking for NTFS support. If you have a dual booting system that does make use of NTFS, you can use the read-only option to gain access to the files. In this case, we're picking no. It's also going to ask for long file name support. Now, personally, I find this a little bit more buggy, but it can really help on your Windows 98 based system where long file names are a thing. Now we're asking for DOSKey. DOSKey is a very useful utility that adds a few more features to the command line. It's going to have the tap to autocomplete function, because this is a modified DOSKey that has a little bit more functionality. It's also going to have the command line history that DOSKey normally provides, and it's going to automatically switch over to insert mode so that you can type without replacing something else that you've already typed. So this is something you'll typically want to load unless you're short on RAM. Now we're going to load the setver support for the better compatibility with older programs. This is also something you typically want to run unless you're very RAM limited. So the DOS fans under you might want to know what the out-of-box memory looks like. On this test system, the conventional memory that we're getting on this system is the largest runnable program is 615K, which is very high. So you might even want to load some other stuff to limit this down further. Usually your sound card drivers will do, but this is plenty. This is already out of the box, as optimized as I could make it to allow you to run the largest programs available. Up next, let's look at some of the tools that we have included with Ultimate DOS, which are from the tools folder, but you can run them anywhere. There is Part, which is a very nice partition manager, and it's also a boot manager, in case you wish to install a boot manager on your system to dual boot or multi-boot. This one allows you to manage your partitions of multiple hard drives, if you have them. So this can be very easily done to define which partitions you like. Of course, there's also fdisk, which is a clone of the real fdisk that has even more features. Again, support for different hard drives, but also a lot more command line options that allow you to automate a lot of the tasks. For now, we are going to use fdisk to partition the drive the classic way. So we are going in fdisk to set up our DOS computer, because this specific computer has a blank hard drive as it's a virtual machine. We are going to accept the FAT32. We are going to choose option 1 to create our DOS partition. We are going to create our primary partition. We're going to acknowledge that it needs to be active. And now the partition has been created, so we can choose escape to continue. It's warning us that we have to restart before you can do anything else. Other tools that are included is Patch SATA, which will allow you to patch a Windows 98 system for modern SATA controllers if you need to install it on a more modern SATA drive that isn't being recognized correctly. There's also a tool that I've made called Limit9X. Limit9X allows you to limit Windows 98 to 512 megabytes of RAM so that you can use it on modern systems, even if patchmem isn't working reliably. And the additional benefit is that limiting to the RAM rather than adding RAM support is going to increase your DOS compatibility under Windows 98. So I highly recommend to use Limit9X for your Windows 98 based system. And last but not least is patchmem, which can of course patch Windows 98 to use higher memory without limiting it, and this one also works on Windows ME, which makes it a better choice for a Windows ME based system. Before we continue, we are now going to reboot so that our partition we just created will become active. While it's rebooting, I'd also like to mention something about MS-DOS 7.1 that's included on this floppy, the Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 variant. This is a customized version of MS-DOS 7.1. that I have made to be the smallest possible while also having the highest functionality. It's only 74 kilobytes in size, which is what allows me to include so many tools on your floppy without resorting to RAM disks. And it's also compatible with Windows 3.1, which we will install a little bit later. And it's going to be compatible with pretty much all of the MS-DOS 6.22 software, so you don't need MS-DOS 6.22, while being able to run both from a floppy and from a hard drive. So while this version ran from floppy, we can now install this exact distribution to our hard drive. To do this, we're going to use the setup command. The setup command lets you specify the source drive and your destination drive, and it's compatible with the Windows 98 installer as well as the Ultimate DOS installer. If we, for example, want to install Windows 98, we can choose the D drive and then the C drive. It will copy all the setup files over so that you can use it more easily in the future if you need a driver. And then it can optionally run the setup. This also means that if you put this on a USB stick and your USB stick is the C drive, you can then let it copy the installation to the D drive and then reboot, so that you can install this very easily on, for example, a HP Thin Client system. Now, for now, we are going to choose the A drive as our floppy, and then the C drive as our destination. We're going to get an error here because I haven't formatted the C drive yet. You don't have to format the C drive, and then you can just ignore this error. We're going to choose fail, so the F option. It will now present us with an option to format this. Now, the reason that I couldn't work around this the other way is that the Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 installer is capable of integrating itself in Windows 98, which we will also be doing later. And to have that check if Windows is installed, I need to put that in front of the formatting option. So you'll only get that error if your system wasn't formatted, but you can totally just let it fail and ignore it. Now we're going to format the drive. If you did already format the drive before running the setup, you'll have to format it again so that it formats it with the correct options to make it bootable. So we are going to format it, and it's a modified version of the format utility that lets you quick format the drive even if it's blank. So the format went very quickly, and now we are going to automatically copy all the Ultimate MS-DOS files. You'll get a glimpse of all the tools that are already included, such as the speed limiting utilities, the memory managers, DOS key, editing tools, CD drive tools, some tools that help you script. There is QBasic on here. There are all kinds of goodies that I'll be showing you in a little bit once it's installed. I'm not speeding up anything for this video, so all the loading times and copy times that you see are the ones that you would get from a real floppy, provided that your floppy is in good condition. So now we're going to reboot the system. I prefer to use the built-in reboot command that is bundled with Ultimate DOS because it will reboot the system in a little bit of a harder way, and on the motherboards that I use that's more stable. Of course, Ctrl-Alt-Delete would have worked just fine as well. So now we are starting the system again, and this time we're going to start it from the hard drive. I'm quickly going for all the default options again. So now we are in DOS, and I hit enter so enthusiastically that we have a bunch of new lines there. If you were following this along as an installation tutorial, congratulations, you now have MS-DOS 7.1 installed and you can begin using it immediately. You will of course need to install any of the drivers for your system that you might have, such as a sound card driver. Before we continue installing anything else, I'll show you some of the stuff that has just been installed and that you can enjoy. So, the first important one for your MS-DOS gaming is the CPU SPD utility. This is a CPU slowdown utility that replaces pretty much all the hardware slowdown utilities that are out there. It's going to allow you to adjust the CPU multiplier, and this is brand agnostic, so it's going to be able to do it on your Intel CPU, on your AMD, on most of the CPUs out there. You'll be able to set the multiplier to slow the CPU itself down. It can also mess with the throttle states. This works on most systems as well, and especially on systems where you cannot adjust the CPU multiplier, such as some of the thin clients, the throttle states will be very helpful. And last but not least, you can of course disable the CPU cache that you might see others do with the setmul utility. So this disables the cache just like anything else, and it usually halves the performance speed, replacing every other hardware tool that you may need. So you're not going to have to hunt down the internet for them, you're not going to have to install anything. This will be the one-stop shop CPU slowdown if your system supports hardware slowdown well. If it doesn't support hardware slowdown well, or for some reason it isn't precise enough despite the very many combinations that you can do, there's also a software-based slowdown utility called slowdown. Slowdown allows you to set a target speed that you want, and then it's going to, if it can, disable the cache, and it's then also going to start sending a lot of requests to your CPU to slow the rest of the system down. And this program will work on literally every system. So even if your system hasn't traditionally supported hardware slowdown well, slowdown will still work, and this is a good replacement for utilities such as moslow. Other cool things that you might like, you may like Volkov Commander. Volkov Commander is very large, so I've included a clone of it called DOS Commander. DOS Commander looks very similar, it can do pretty much the same things, but it's also fitting on the floppy and included for your convenience if you like navigating your files a little bit easier. Up next, RAR. This is of course the DOS version of WinRAR that you can use to create RAR archives, and you can also extract them. If you need to extract zip files instead, there's of course unzip that's included for your zip file extracting needs. If you like MIDI sound and you have a sound canvas, for example, some sound cards may not properly do MPU, so here is soft MPU for those of you that need it for your MPU-based sound card. And of course, we can also create RAM disks if we want. So if you do want a RAM disk for whatever reason, we can create RAM disks. So now we have RAM disks, which you can also use to further limit the memory. But you won't need to do this very often because the memory is already limited to a setting that works on pretty much all the DOS utilities. So I'm going to quickly get rid of the RAM disk again, so that we have maximum memory available. The next one is QBasic. It is included, so you can write your QBasic software and of course run them. And simple things like the basic editor are included as well. I'll quickly do a dir so that you can see once more what kind of programs are included. So we have RAR, we have the SHSUCD HD, which is allowing you to mount ISO images, but keep in mind that it won't be emulating the sound. So this will only work for a selection of your games. And that's pretty much it. There are a few tools included still for copying, so for example the Xcopy or the more advanced FreeDOS Xcopy. And also very useful, there is a floppy archiving software. So you can use this to create proper backup grade backups of your legal floppies that includes things like bad sector copy protection. It won't be able to write those back, but it's compatible with the hardware devices that are. Of course, it can write its own floppy images back, but not every floppy controller can write back the back sectors accurately. So you can create very high grade level backups of both your MS-DOS games, but also games from other compatible systems that work with your floppy drive. And you can write back a lot of them. And of course, all of them if you have the special hardware for it. Another cool thing you can do is you can use a alignment test, which you can use to calibrate your floppy drives if you're doing this by hand physically. So for floppy, we have a very extensive collection. We also have a low-level floppy formatting tool that can format floppies that have gone bad, but are still fine on a hardware level. For example, they lost their magnetism and now you're getting those track 0 errors. You can totally use this to format your floppy, and you can also use this to format your floppy in the less common formats, such as the 1.72 megabyte format. So that's the floppy side of things. Let's say we want to run Windows 3.1. People might say that you need to run MS-DOS 6.22 because there's just no way that we can run Windows 3.1 on MS-DOS 7.1. Well, this version of the MS-DOS, the Ultimate DOS, the version has been patched to include everything that it needs to run Windows 3.1. So this is a unmodified copy of Windows 3.1, but for the convenience of the video, it's loaded from a CD drive, not from a floppy drive. We are able to copy everything to the hard drive, of course. We're going to type in the name. And now the Windows setup is being run. It's going to fail to modify the configuration files of Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1, but everything you need to properly run Windows 3.1 is already configured, so you can ignore those errors that it's going to give. It's going to very rapidly install all the program groups. We're going to choose the MS-DOS editor, skip the tutorial, and now we're back in DOS, and we can run in Windows. So here we have the program manager and the file manager. Now, some of you might say that Windows 3.1 can only run in its standard mode in MS-DOS 7.1. This, by the way, what you're now seeing is a 7.1 bug that I cannot fix. Once you exit Windows 3.1, you have to change the directory once in order to get everything to run again. So if you're getting missing files or bad sector errors after running 3.1, your hard drive's fine. Just change the directory once because it cannot do that properly like it can with the 6.22 system. That's the only downside of running 3.1 on top of 7.1. So we're going to start it again with the /3 option to force that it's a more modern processing mode. And as you can see, it works fine. So you're not limited to standard mode like people might say. This is a properly custom MS-DOS 7.1 that can do all that. And as you may have noticed earlier in the video, we have formatted the hard drive as FAT32. So yes, this is now a Windows 3.1 that has FAT32 support because it inherits that of MS-DOS. So you have your fully functional 3.1 system here. But what if you want to run Windows 98 instead, and you prefer something like MS-DOS Super Easy because that one can integrate in Windows 98? Well, let me quickly swap the hard drive around with one that can run on Windows 98, because I already have it pre-installed. So we are going to swap the hard drive real quick, and now that that is done, I'm going to start the computer back up into Windows 98. So let's say we just used the Ultimate MS-DOS floppy to install Windows 98, and now we're starting it for the first time. Of course, everything in the video is being presented as if it's running on a Pentium 100 MHz with a real floppy drive. Nothing is sped up, so obviously if there's a little bit of a longer loading time, that is why. So we have made it to the Windows 98 desktop, and before we can start installing Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 on top of Windows 98, there's one thing you need to do, because otherwise the installation will fail. We need to generate the required files for the MS-DOS mode by rebooting to MS-DOS at least once. If you've done this in the past, you could skip this step, but because this is a clean installation, we'll have to reboot to MS-DOS. I'll first show you the before. So this is the MS-DOS mode that you're used to from Windows 98. It doesn't have CD-ROM support, it doesn't have its memory managers handled properly. I did include Aladdin on the system, but we cannot autocomplete because of course DOS key is missing. We're going to quickly configure the sound. And now we're going to try and run Aladdin. As you can see, there's a memory allocation error because this system has more memory than Aladdin can handle. So how do we fix all this? How do we get Windows 98 set up? Well, we're going to reboot back to the Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 floppy. We're going to choose the Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1. Of course, we're going to use all the default options again. So now that we're back, we're going to do the same thing we did before. So we're going to choose to set up from A to C. It now automatically detects that Windows has been installed, and it offers you the choice if you wish to replace the MS-DOS mode, like we're going to do, or if you wish to format the hard drive and just make it a pure MS-DOS 7.1 system to, for example, install Windows 3.1 on again. So we're going to replace MS-DOS mode, and everything there is going to be automatic. It copies all its files over to the C drive again. And now that it's done, it has automatically installed itself into Windows 98. So we're going to reboot the system and I'll show you what that looks like. So now we're back in Windows 98. Before we continue, I'll quickly show you the amount of RAM in the system to show you that it is indeed a high memory system. This is the maximum amount of RAM that Windows 98 can handle in a stable way. Now with the MS-DOS mode super easy, you may have seen a video where they place a shortcut on the desktop so you can reboot to MS-DOS. Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 doesn't need it. It's automatically integrated into the shutdown menu. So we can once again choose Restart in MS-DOS mode, which is why you had to do it before, so that it could properly replace it. And now that we do, instead of showing the command prompt, it's actually rebooting the system properly. So even if you have hardware that doesn't support the system well without a reboot, it reboots first to get rid of all the Windows 98 drivers that have been loaded prior. We're now booting back into the floppy menu, of course, but we're going to choose the hard drive 0 option. And as you can see, we now have the Windows 98 startup menu with all the options of Ultimate MS-DOS 7.1 installed. So there you go. This is yet another way that you can use this floppy to install your DOS-based system, even if you like to use Windows 98 with it. Now, if you choose this option, you're going to have a few downsides, because this is no longer the modified MS-DOS version that we had prior. If you choose this one, you're going to be using the MS-DOS that's included with your Windows 98 system, and that means that we can now no longer use Windows 3.1 on top of this. You can try and copy my io.sys file to the hard drive. It will probably work, but I don't recommend it, because of course you're then going to get into incompatibilities easier, since that's not really meant to happen on Windows 98. Will probably be fine, but if you're then going to install updates, you're going to screw things up. So don't really do that. Choose the MS-DOS 7.1, choose the Windows 98 if you prefer that, or perhaps set up the bootloader like I've shown you before. So that is it. This is now the system, and as the finale, I'm going to once again try Aladdin. Going to choose all the same options again. And as you can see, Aladdin is now completely functional. I hope you found this video interesting and that it's going to help you with the DOS projects that you might build, or perhaps your own December videos that you might do. I'm very curious to see what people are going to do with this, how they're going to enjoy it, or perhaps the kind of things that they'll run into trying to enjoy it. If you want a copy of my floppy, there should be a link in the description. If I upload both versions, the udbd file will be the floppy version and the udbs version will be for USB sticks. I might make a video later showcasing how to install this on a HP thin client in case your system doesn't have floppy and you want to use this from a USB stick. The only thing you cannot do is install the floppy version on a USB stick because of the bootloader that you saw before. That one is only compatible with floppies. If you copy it incorrectly, it will not start. The USB stick version doesn't have that bootloader. It will just immediately go for MS-DOS, and that allows it to work from the larger sticks. And there's also some extra things included on that version that didn't fit on the floppy version. I hope you all enjoy this a lot. I've spent a lot of time trying to make all these programs fit. Almost every program on this floppy is some kind of unoriginal modified version, and if it isn't, then it usually has been shrunk. So you're going to get a lot more functionality out of this than the tools that you might have been familiar with prior. You're also going to save a lot of space on the floppy, of course, by doing this. I left a little bit of extra space in case you need to add a file or if you need to replace the SCSI driver that's included, because the SCSI driver for this project only supports Boss Logic cards. If you need a different one, just replace scsi.sys and everything should be good to go as well. Thank you for watching and have a very happy December.